In today's Zoffy, we've got with us Zac Trolley, who's from Calgary, and he's working on an interesting project to market and promote Canadian oil-based or oil field technology to the space industry. And I don't know much about this, but I'm fascinated to talk to, looking forward to talking to Zac about this. And I have a little bit of an angle on this myself. In late 2017, I was hired to copy edit the final report for the Energy Diversification Advisory Committee in Alberta. And they were looking at petrochemicals and partial upgrading and other technologies to add value into the hydrocarbon sector. And one of the questions I asked while I was editing is, where is technology? Because technology, if you look at the report, is not a part of that. And yet Alberta has a very, very, very vibrant technology sector connected to the oil patch. Some of it's software, some of it's sensors, some of it's all sorts of pumps and different processes. You can go into industrial parks in Calgary's foothills and some industrial parks in Edmonton and find all sorts of small to medium-sized Alberta companies that are doing, that are developing and marketing technology that you would never have guessed were in existence. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really interested in this, because this is essentially my argument for taking technology that we already have and perhaps pivoting it to new industries like space and creating new markets, jobs, and so on in the process. So, Zac, have I kind of got it right?
Yeah.
Is this what you're up to?
Yeah, that's the high level vision.
Tell us about what you're doing.
So I guess I'll tell you a bit about myself and then kind of move into a little bit of the background in space for those who don't really know. So my name is Zac Trolley. I moved to Calgary in '99, so I've been here for a while. Finished high school here, went to SAIT, got my engineering degree in Lakehead. So I have a tech and an engineering background, and been working in the energy industry for most of my career in projects. But my passion is space exploration. So I've always had an eye on the tech in space, what's going on, and specifically the planet Mars is something that I'm very interested and passionate about. So in the late 2010s, I actually was one of the finalists for the now defunct Mars One program, which was my first I guess, foray into actually being in space, because there's not a lot happening here in Alberta. So once I went through that, I didn't make it very far, but once I went through that, I actually applied to the International Space University and did a program with them in 2014. For a few years, I was doing a lot of education with grade 5 and 6 students. I go to their schools and talk about space, do programs with Telespark. And then in 2018, I did a mock Mars mission in Utah, where you basically pretend you are on Mars. You go through the same protocols, procedures to try and work out all the kinks before you actually go there. And through all this, you know, I've been attending space conferences and hanging out with those space people. And the Alberta oil sands specifically has a lot of technology that the space sector requires, but those two groups never interact. Even in Canada, the space sector doesn't interact with the oil sands sector. So there's this gap between, you know, people that require the tech and the people that have it, and they're not communicating. So the current status in space is that it's moving towards privatizations. We've all heard about, you know, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Richard Branson with his doing his flights, suborbital flights and things like that. And what that means is more and more contracts are going to private contractors, and private contractors are operating it. So I think in a month or two, SpaceX will be flying the first astronauts to the space station, which opens up private space flight. And that knocks onto, when you start privatizing things, you get, you know, industry and markets interested in how can we make money in this. And of course, there's a lot of resources in space. All the rock, minerals, clays that we find on Earth, we find in space in pardon the pun, astronomical quantities in space. So in 2015, the Obama administration amended US law to allow companies to possess materials that they found in space. Prior to that, nobody could own, you can't own the moon, you can't buy the moon. But what the US did was they changed their laws to say, if you pick up a piece of something and you alter it, you refine it, you change it, you modify it, somehow you can own that piece of something. Luxembourg was actually soon to follow. So they're the two jurisdictions that have changed their laws to be able to do that, meaning that companies now have a legal framework to buy and sell space resources. And 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration released an executive order asking companies to start doing that, to say, well, you have the green light to go and do that, and to go looking for international partners you require to execute these resource missions in space. The other important thing to know about is how fast the price point for accessing space is changing. So when the shuttle was flying, it cost about $20,000 per kilogram to get something into orbit. That's now $4,000 on a Falcon 9 rocket. And that price is dropping down. It'll probably be in a few years with the Falcon Heavy and other heavy lift rockets, that's now $2,000. So we're looking at a 10x cost reduction in moving something into space. Now it's still pretty expensive, $2,000 per kilogram. You know, so you imagine a liter of water, you know, you just having a bottle, that's an expensive liter of water. Now, the Artemis mission is the mission to return to the moon. It's a NASA-led mission, but Canada is a partner, and Canada is currently slotted to supply the Canadarm3 for the space station orbiting the moon. On that roadmap, they want to have a permanent settlement on the moon to be able to have a research center there so people will travel back and forth. To resupply those two, the space station and the base, it's actually cheaper to transfer materials from the moon to those places than taking it up from the Earth to those places. So part of the economic driver, they're the first customer for resources in space are going to be these, the space station, this moon base. And water is going to be one of the most important resources. You can drink it, obviously you need to stay alive, to grow plants, use it in industrial applications, any kind of solvents. You can be used as a radiation shield. And it can also be used as a rocket fuel. So you can split it into hydrogen and oxygen and use it directly as a rocket fuel. So the rockets that they're building right now to ferry between the moon and Earth are being built for that fuel. So there's going to be a market on the lunar surface for water to be used as fuel. And that water is locked away in ice. So you have these frozen ice fields inside craters on the south pole of the moon that, if you can imagine, vast areas of land that you need to dig up this resource, transport to a processing facility, process that liquid, store that liquid, and then have an offtake agreement when people need it to fuel it, and then return that Earth back to, or return that moon Earth back to the crater where it came from, which is very similar to an oil sands process. So our supply chain, our engineering basically processes to build modularly in a shop, put it on a truck, ship to location for assembly is the exact process needed to build something on the moon. Because you're gonna have to, instead of shipping up to Fort Mac, we ship down to Houston and load it onto a rocket. You assemble all these things on site, and then you start up your process remotely, which is what we do. So a lot of our processes are made for that. And we're actually one of the best people in the world to be doing that, because no one else does the oil sands like we do. So the the thesis is people are going to be mining the moon for water and beyond, asteroids for fuel. Alberta has technology that is very similar to what's required, and our financial markets and all that are set up in a way that we deal with fuel and liquids, and it's all understood. And we do mega projects. The tech project was $20 billion, and that scale is what's required for space. So I think Alberta is uniquely suited to do exactly that.
Well, that's a fascinating story, Zac. I had no idea that this was going on. So are you kind of setting yourself up to be the linchpin between the space industry down in the US and the oil sands producers and creators of, manufacturers of technology up in Alberta?
So like I said, I kind of have a foot in both worlds. I've worked here and kind of been the other one, and I see how big that divide is. So I'm trying to be the middleman to find a way to get both these people sitting at the same table. Now, the mining industry in Canada has already started this with Natural Resources Canada. They have asteroid mining on their long-term roadmap, but oil sands and the oil industry is not involved. So while, if you think of asteroid mining, you have gold and platinum and all those things, which is pretty good for the mining industry. But if you're mining water, that's a liquid. And then the oil and petrochemical industry is actually better suited to deal with that resource than the mining industry is. So there's a few players in here, and a lot of them aren't speaking to each other. And I'm trying to bring them all together so that they can at least sit down at the table and hear each other's stories.
What's been the response so far from the industry in Canada to this information? Are they skeptical? Are they embracing it?
The oil and gas?
Yeah.
So it's a chicken and the egg problem. So when I discuss, with manufacturers, and I say, if we needed tanks, and I gave you the specifications for building a tank on the moon, could you do it? And they'd say, sure. We might need to buy a new welder or install a new process or have a new test, but we build all around the world. We've changed our processes to do that. There's no reason why we could not do that. But when you kind of move up, past that conversation, all of a sudden it's, well, we're not a space company. We want to focus on what we're doing. And there's this kind of mental leap into providing equipment to that industry. So it's, people say we can do it, but then the kind of a risk aversion kicks in the back of their head. And that's kind of where the conversation stalls.
There's a lesson here from the partial upgrading technology story. And there's 10 companies that are working on partial upgrading technologies. So you take bitumen and process it into heavy crude or even medium crude. And all of those technologies, or most of them, have reached the valley of death. So that's the point where, the technology looks promising, and maybe it's been in the pilot stage and it's sort of, demonstrated itself at small quantities, but now it needs capital to scale up, maybe do a demonstration project or maybe go into full commercial production, and it can't find capital. There's just no capital around. And it sounds like if it's not, your situation is not exactly like that, it's kind of analogous to that.
It's a little bit like that. Now there is capital available, but it's all within the kind of aerospace circles. So MDA, the manufacturer of the Canada arm, has an RFP out now asking for partners to help build the Canada arm. They're looking for electrical engineers, material scientists, robotic experts. But it's open, but only people in Quebec and Ontario are applying. The Canadian Space Agency has an open call right now for companies who want to be, basically on their bidding list for all this technology. And they just don't come to Alberta because they think we have this, we're waving our oil and gas flag, and the space people think we're not interested. And then the oil and gas people say that's not my wheelhouse, when in fact there's a huge overlap. They just don't, it's just not, they don't realize it.
So have we got a conceptual problem that we need to get over first before we can get into the more nuts and bolts stuff like RFPs and so on? I mean, it sounds like people need to change their thinking before they can get on to the next stages of making this work.
Absolutely. It's basically, we have world-class project execution. We have fantastic trades. We have a massive capacity for manufacturing. It's currently sitting idle. And the question being, what do we do with it? So if we can build, we can basically build anything we want. If we take the knowledge we have of process technology and building modular process technology, if we can send it to the Arctic, if we can send it to the desert, why not send it to the moon? And it's just that leap to get people thinking about that we're missing.
Now, the fact that you're an engineer, and you mentioned right off the top that you are currently unemployed, as most people are, many people are, and this is really interesting because from late 2014 on, after we had the big downturn, there were a lot of people, like highly trained technical people, like engineers and designers and what have you, who were, say, middle-aged, and they've never been hired back.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are still walking around Calgary with resumes trying to get a job, and they can't do it. And there's all of this human capital that's being underutilized, and it seems to me that there's an opportunity there to somehow put these people to work, maybe some retraining, or, I mean, my goodness, a lot of the people working in the oil and gas industry are not petroleum engineers. They're chemical engineers or mechanical engineers, and they've kind of learned the business so that they apply their engineering training and skills to an industry, a different industry.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if something like that couldn't happen in this case.
100%. I absolutely agree. If you're a mechanical engineer that's been working with valves in process equipment, it would be, here are the specifications you need to meet. Talk to the manufacturers and get them, to meet those specifications. It's the exact same process as, with a different playbook. When I talk to space folks, I was hoping to bring them down here actually before COVID happened to the energy show. We're planning to bring some space folks down, have a bit of a pavilion, get them to walk the floor to see our capacity. Of course, now that plan is out the window. But, if you imagine spinning up a $10 million procurement job in a downtown Calgary office, we could do that tomorrow, right? $1 billion job. We could spin that up without having, that's normal for us. So it's completely possible to take, a 10% space staff that know the space industry and a 90%, engineering background people from any industry and make that work. We do that all the time. That's how Alberta operates.
Well, this is my last question, and we'll open it up to the folks in the Zoffy. And that is, I'm more and more writing and thinking about leadership within the energy industry, particularly hydrocarbons, and the need for a new generation of leaders to come out and lead the industry in different directions, and better position it to adapt and be prosperous in the low carbon future and so on. And this, to me, is related. It's like we need leaders. We need somebody to get out. You're really trying to position yourself in that space, but we need leaders within the industry who recognize the potential. We need people on the public policy side and government side. What do you think of that hypothesis?
Absolutely. It's finding the leaders that have the connections to understand the problem. And in Alberta, that's a bit difficult because for many, many decades, we've kind of been hopped over in aerospace. So Magellan is in Manitoba. They have a big facility there. They do a lot of stuff. And on the road show, they kind of go to Manitoba, fly right over Saskatchewan, Alberta, and land in BC for their, their tech and programming and software expertise. And we've been skipped over, in part because the miscommunication between the East and the West about what Alberta actually does. So when I talk to space folks in Eastern Canada, they don't believe that anybody would be interested. And when you talk to folks in Alberta, they say, well, no one's come to us to ask us. So the situation you have is it's like a junior high dance where everyone's sitting against the walls and we just need someone to go walk the other side and say, hey, do you want to dance? And then I think everyone will show up. But we need a handful of people to sit around the table and say, yeah, we're going to do a pilot or a study or something to say we want to pursue this. We want to do this dance.
Folks, if you can put up your little blue hand, let's open it up for some questions. And who we got? Dave, fire away.
Since we're sort of off the topic of oil per se, the biggest problem as I see it is finding politicians with any vision. I got a good friend who's a Bitcoin miner, and we put a proposal together to the Manitoba government to build a 5 megawatt Bitcoin mine in Gillam. And since they're all cooled in oil bath, the processors, we were going to basically have a huge hydroponic vegetable garden up there inside an arena, or build another arena and heat it with waste heat. Mm-hmm. One taker. And I mean, Manitoba has incredibly cheap hydro. It would have been right up on site. There's plenty of water, as Markham knows. He's a local Gillam boy. But we had no buy-in from the government, and my wife wasn't prepared for us to go to the bank and mortgage everything to do this. But where independent guys come in, and I think you guys are talking about having people interested in the business. This guy's building a 2 megawatt mine, Bitcoin mine right now on the family farm, half an hour from here. And his hydro bill is going to be 60 grand a month to mine Bitcoin. And that's with cheap Manitoba prices. So how do we hook, to me, the question is, how do we hook the politicians and some of these, as Markham calls them, these junior guys who have all kinds of expertise and local knowledge and how to really get things done, get them involved in a different train of thought other than the traditional oil patch philosophy?
Well, in January, my plan was to do the conference circuit, and like I said, bring people, start doing an exchange program. But that plan is no longer valid. But the leadership thing you mentioned, I think is correct, and it's not just in politicians; it's in business leaders and the whole gamut, that people in general are very comfortable being comfortable. And when you say we need to move way out of your zone, that's some people are okay with that. Most people aren't. And it takes a while to get that going. But the thing that we have is that there's already a project underway. And not only is the US government funding the Artemis mission, the Canadian government is funding it, and private industry in the States is behind it. So, you are in company with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and the richest people on planet Earth are moving in this direction. And something I like to do when I meet people face to face is I always carry a $5 bill with me. Because when you pull out the $5 bill, on the back of it has a Canada arm. And the Canada arm replaced hockey on the last $5 bill, and nobody complained. So space is part of, our Canadian identity. When you think of all those astronauts that go up, the Canadian flag on that spacesuit, everyone feels proud about that. So there's a lower barrier to entry if you just kind of let people know that they can do this. We don't have to be rocket scientists. We're just building process equipment, and you put it on the truck and let someone else do it on the offtake. So it's that mindset of figuring out, how to do those kind of things.
Ross, I'm going to get you in here because I have a little bit of an observation from the work I've done when I was in the industry for a bit, and also the book I wrote last year, because I interviewed a bunch of oil sands companies about innovation. Well, my take on this is that the industry, excuse me, the industry that you're trying to get interested in this is incredibly innovative within the box. Like the industry will come up with, for their problems where they need to save money or engineer a solution to a problem within that box, they're incredibly innovative. But if you ask them to change the box or step outside the box, they're very risk averse, very, very risk averse, very cautious, very conservative. And you're essentially asking them to step outside their box and
Yes.
take their expertise. And Ross used to be before he retired, was a geoscientist in the industry. Ross, have I got it correct? What do you think?
You do. I mean, the thing that I was going to say, of course, is when you talk about the oil industry, oil companies themselves, I don't consider all that technical. They're basically property managers for the most part. It's the oil service companies that do all the process control and stuff like that, and the real kind of hands-on engineering. And unfortunately, during the downturns, they're the ones that take it on the chin. This is not the first time really for the oil company in space, because if you look at the Martian rover, it has technology to discern what rocks are made of and stuff, and it's all borrowed from the oil industry, and I believe that Schlumberger may have helped with that.
Zac?
Yeah. You can see partnerships with heavy industry. So CAT, the heavy machinery manufacturer, is working with NASA.
Hang on.
All right, I'm unmuted. They've been figuring out how to do heavy machinery on the moon and automate that machinery. There was, when they build these rovers, as you explained, they go to some of these expertise, and a lot of them are Canadian industry players. So the sensor that detected snow on the Phoenix lander on Mars was Canadian. Canadians detected snow on Mars. Because that's what we do. So, and I agree on the box analogy. I've talked to some big players in Alberta, and they say, this all sounds fantastic. How is it going to improve efficiency on my oil sands project? She said, no, you have a brand new customer. This is a different box you're playing in, and they just aren't interested. And now we get the double whammy that, like you said, the people that would be are the first to take a hit when the economy's down, and when the economy is up, they're full tilt busy working 60 hours a week and don't have time for anything new. So it's really hard to find that sweet spot to say, here's the time when we will do that. And I just think now there's no better time. If we have an influx of cash coming in because everybody needs it, the question is, what do we do with it?
So in a case like this, Zac, we've talked about, I think it was Dave mentioned, we need the politicians to get on board, which strikes me as a very Canadian answer. When I was in Saskatchewan, I was chair of the Prince Albert Regional Economic Development Authority, and we always look to government, right, to provide leadership, and the politicians to provide leadership. And maybe that is where leadership needs to come from. Maybe we do need, like the Prime Minister to make this his pet project so that we can advance it. But if the oil and gas industry, particularly the service sector and the oil sands companies, are really not that interested, have you got any ideas for how to break that, that logjam?
It's tough. So in Canada, the Canadian Space Agency is actually under the Department of Transportation. So it's kind of this, you end up in this weird circular handoff, where if Natural Resources Canada was more involved, they might be more interested in, doing those kind of things. But the Space Agency is providing funding. So in February, I think they put $6 million out for research projects and pilot projects. A few went to the Sudbury area, that mining area in Sudbury, went there to look at how do we drill ice. So their thing is to actually drill in and like, you know, do it like as if it was hard rock mining, where the oil sands would do, you know, you drag it up and you move that to a facility, you do it there. So yeah, especially now in an isolated environment where really what you need to do is to have, you know, some folks sitting around a table drinking a beer, scribbling on a napkin to break those barriers down. It's tough, but that industry is moving forward. Australia is involved in it. Like I said, the US, the Luxembourg are involved in it. The European Union is looking to invest in space mining and space resources. And with Canada having such a rich heritage in mining, in oil sands, in timber, in water, and all these resources, in addition to you know, remote communities and winter living and all these things that we do, you know, we are I think the perfect place for this industry to grow, and it's passing us by. So kind of stumped.
Well, on that note, have we got any other questions from the group? Put up the blue hand. Ross, go ahead.
Well, just a comment on the water resources. My understanding on the moon that they were found through a sort of ground penetrating radar that was done from satellite orbit at the time. And ground penetrating radar, of course, is one of the things that has been used in the oil sands to try to delineate stuff, but not all that successfully. So maybe there's a possibility to take the technology that you're using on the moon and move it back to the oil sands.
So that I didn't touch on that part. The spin back into our industries is actually huge. So if you imagine you're working on a process equipment that needs to run automatically on the moon, the expertise you gain on figuring that out to be able to run a pump jack or compression station here in Alberta has direct applications. You know, the analogy I use is once we figure out how to grow food on Mars, we can grow food wherever we want. It's just a matter of logistics at that point. The technology is there. So along the way of figuring out how to autonomously run a process facility on the moon, if Alberta is involved in that, we can figure out how to autonomously run all our processes here, be better efficient, like you said, figure out how to find resources better and become more efficient in what we do here. There's huge opportunity, but that's in the 5-year range, which everyone right now is looking at the 1-year range. So we get back to that leadership issue. Who is going to hold this up and basically say, here's a 10-year project that's got a few years of R&D, few years of piloting, and then an execution phase to be able to sit for that 10 years and run it the whole way through. That's what we're missing.
If nobody has any other questions, Zac, I'd like to thank you for coming out today. This has been fascinating, frankly. This is not what I expected, and this is kind of an exciting opportunity. We wish you all the best.
Well, thank you very much. And if you want to get a hold of me, LinkedIn is probably the best place. You can look me up. And if you have other questions, I'm always happy to talk space.